If you're in this room, you probably know a little bit about my story. If you came because you heard we have free popcorn, it's right back there. This beautiful boat behind me is my 1965 Albert 30 sloop SP Triteo. Look at that. Relax, she's spoken for. Sailing is absolute magic. I've been blown by a breeze across the sea, like a leaf on a pond. 8,636 miles from Los Angeles, California, to the bottom of the world in New Zealand.
Yeah.
There's the route. Except there's not a little dip. I would imagine people in here kind of like sailing. So I want to read a couple of passages from my logs for you, because sailing is all about ups and downs. It can be absolute hell, or it can be incredible. I want to put it in perspective for anyone who hasn't done ocean sailing. Imagine that one crazy friend you have. And what's funny is everyone just pictures someone. So that one crazy friend you have, he calls you up. He's like, okay, I have this idea. We're going to go on a road trip. We're going to drive 10,000 miles at 4 miles an hour. There's a high likelihood we could die every single day, and you only get to sleep in 2-hour increments, sometimes 1-hour increments. You'd most likely be like, nah, I'm chill. It's all good. Send me a postcard. That's ocean sailing. But in direct contrast to that, the highs and the lows are both equally as extreme. So I'll read you a couple passages out of the log. Predictably unpredictable. At 2 a.m., the winds vanished. At 2 a.m., the winds vanished, and the boat was being tossed around like a ruckus made in the cabin sounded like a box of dishes in the back of a pickup truck. I climbed out of my nest, went on deck to steer us back on course. The wind was so light, it seemed hopeless, because the wind vane can't steer without any wind. Our course should be 240 degrees on the compass. I steer her to 270 degrees to try to get her moving, and suddenly, she is screaming through the water like a Nantucket sleigh ride. Back to 240 degrees, not a breath of air. I started to wonder if I'd actually forgotten how to sail. And then I remembered we were 700 nautical miles offshore, so at some point in the last 8 days, I knew how to sail. So this went on for 30 minutes. I'm sitting my underwear in the cockpit, trying to get her moving. I would get her going, climb into my nest, then she would wallow. I began to feel like my mom, thinking, don't make me come out there. Finally, I'd had enough. I put on my fallies, put on my hoodie, sighed, climbed out into the cockpit, and found we were sailing perfectly at 240 degrees, making fine sea. Hashtag Yelp. Day 23. Day 23, noon position. Friday, September 3rd, 2021. Days run, 81 nautical miles. Outstanding days run. Very happy with this. Yesterday afternoon, I had 4 albatross cruising less than a quarter of a mile from my bow for hours. They were gliding elegantly over the sea in large circles, disappearing in the troughs of the waves, then reappearing as they soared up and out. The surrounding skies were filled with dramatic squalls, some dumping rain on the starboard horizon, others just brooding to port. As the sun began to set, it broke through and below a cluster of dark gray clouds. Beautiful golden light illuminated the bottoms of some of the clouds, backlighting others with a stunning glow of orange light, creating a contrast with some of the clouds that seemed to enhance their blue-gray colors. All the while, baby blue skies peeked through the slightest gaps in the low cover. The color of light was as vivid as the Flemish still life painting, where the darkness plays as much of a role as the colors. I stood on deck trying to take in every second of the show as it slowly changed. becoming even more stunning when one of the black albatrosses flew directly over me, cocked his head, and made eye contact. It was within 20 feet. I could clearly see its strikingly beautiful face. It circled the boat a few times before flying off. According to sea lore, to spot an albatross is a good omen. It is said that albatross are the souls of sailors who were lost at sea, now watching over the earthbound sailors as they cross oceans. I will never forget this experience. Let's take it back to the beginning. In 2014, I was invited to be an artist in residence on a sailboat in northern Scotland. There's an organization called the Clipperton Project that would pair artists and sailors and marine biologists together and then see what came of it. I had created a drawing machine that made drawings based on the boat's movements at sea. So I made abstract drawings and removed my hand from the process. As soon as I stepped on that boat, sailing out Selkie, my life was changed forever. I asked 1 billion questions. I wanted to know everything we were doing. And at the time I had no idea. I was being mentored by the most experienced captain I still have ever to meet, Captain Celia Bolt. And she patiently answered every question and encouraged me. And we sailed all throughout the Orkney Isles. We went to Neolithic ruins, tombs, sites of Viking battles. And I often point to the moment that I was kind of done for. We'd been sailing through pea soup fog for like 12 hours. And we came into the ancient seaport village of Stromness. The village and its cathedrals slowly came out of the haze. The anchor dropped. Its chain rattled out. To me, this is when I realized that adventure sailing was as close as you could get to time travel. And I was done. Like, my life was forever changed. And by the time I stepped off that boat in Port Williams at the end of the Caledonian Canal, we had transited Loch Ness. When I stepped off that boat, I had already decided to abandon my art career and just make sailing my life full time. I was like, this is what I have to do with my life. I read somewhere that 80% of the countries in the world can be reached by water. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's all I needed to hear to see the dream, to see as many of those countries as I possibly could. So when I got back to Los Angeles, I found my way into boats locally, Mark Wilson, and on race boats, any kind of boats I could get in California. And then I started volunteering for yacht deliveries and got my ocean sailing experience, and then eventually I was getting paid to do yacht deliveries. So that was like what I did for the first couple of years to gain experience and to just get on the water. On my 40th birthday, April of 2015, I was recovering from double pneumonia that almost took my life. And I made myself a promise that in 5 years, I would be out sailing the world. Now the biggest issue with that is I had no money and I have no boat. But luckily, I'm more stubborn than I'm logical, so I just charged forward for the whole planet. In April of 2017, I bought my dream boat. And Colby knows what a nightmare that turned out to be. We put in a lot, and so did Maytal. Maytal, where are you? She's not raising her hand. So yeah, I bought the dream boat and got to work. Instantly got into restoring her. Within 3 months, I had her back in sailing condition. She hadn't sailed in 6 years when I bought her. And within 3 months, myself and Maytal were out on the first sail. And by December of Christmas of that year, I was doing my first ever solo adventure to the Channel Islands. And it was just unbelievable. As I went from Anchorage to Anchorage, it was the happiest I've ever been in my life. I'd never felt joy like that. And I knew that I was on the right path. And I just recently got to visit Santa Cruz the other day with John Conway. And it's still just as magical. Even with all the things I've seen, that is a fantastic island. So, all you sailors, make sure you get to the Channel Islands this summer. So, I spent the next 4 years preparing the boat, refitting her, getting herself and myself ready for ocean sailing and ocean cruising. I did this with my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, and we visited more than 27 anchorages throughout Southern California. In June of 2021, I untied the lines at Newmark's Marina for good, left the slip, and was off to begin my life as a full-time cruiser. A few months later, everything changed for me. So August of 2021, my wife abruptly left me on the eve of us to go sailing the world. So the only thing I knew to do was to put to sea. This is me leaving Chase Park on that morning and pointing my bow west for Hawaii. Now, I don't know that like voluntary solitary confinement when you have a severely broken heart. I wouldn't suggest anyone try it out. But all I knew is that I wanted to put as many miles between myself and my past that I could. And I had hid from the grief of the loss of our mother in 2013, and I knew that I didn't want to hide from this grief. So I just approached it head on and put to sea. And life at sea is takes some getting used to, especially at dinner time. It is not, I always say if you're worried about speed or comfort, you shouldn't be on a sailboat. And there's, especially with ocean sailing. So, you know, I started falling into the routine of life. One day kind of bleeds into another. You read, you write, you know, you make beans and rice as I'm doing on the screen right now. And just like chip off the miles. On day 14, 1,000 miles from Hawaii, I lost all steering and found myself adrift in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Also, wouldn't advise anyone. I believe that I hit a submerged sea container. My rudder is wooden and it had bronze rods. I believe it just was a glancing blow that fractured the rods because the tiller actually failed in my hand. So the boat, we had just gotten into trades, the boat wouldn't hold course. I'm holding the tiller, and it just like would not hold course. It would not hold course. And then it just fell quietly over. And the boat came hard up into 16 knots of wind. And I was like, and I shook it, and nothing happened. Here's the vlog, so you can see where that came about. And I think Sarah was the first person that texted me, because I have a short team, and Sarah texted me and was like, what's happening? Why did you turn so hard on the track? So, I needed to know what was going on below water before I made any decisions as to how to move forward. So I put the GoPro in the water and found that the wooden rudder had actually separated from the tiller post. So the post you see sticking out, that's the actual bronze tiller post that is attached to the tiller. So there was no, you know, I know I was doomed on an easy repair at that point. So I wasted no time getting suited up and getting in the water. Now, a couple issues with this. Other than the fact that I was in the middle of the ocean, I'm solo, and the boat, all the sail is down, but the boat still sails at a knot and a half because it was 16 to 20 knots of wind. The pitching of the boat was my greatest concern. I was afraid it was going to knock me out, and I could drown. Yeah, it was. The crazy thing is, like, when I'm at an anchorage, I can easily touch my rudder, but it was I couldn't even touch the rudder, let alone get a line wrapped around it, brought up either side. I would swim as hard as I could, and I was tethered, but it was impossible to even touch the rudder with the motion of the boat, and I was just being pulled on the tether like I'm being dragged behind a car, going like 1 mile an hour. So after 3 days and 2 dive attempts that brought me closer to death than I'm really comfortable with, I started working on the final sort of option. Now, if I couldn't have figured out how to steer the boat and get myself to Hawaii, the only other option is to call for rescue. A cargo ship would divert, pick me up, and I would have to sink Triteo. So I'd have to cut all the hoses and scuttle the boat so that it wasn't a danger to other ships. And I sat in my cockpit and imagined her filling with water. And I was like, hell no. Like, that's a non-option. That is not happening. So Captain David Stovall, Captain Noah Peffer on my shore team, they started sending me, so I have Iridium Go as a device that turns my iPhone or iPad into a sat phone, so I can receive simple text messages. I can't get online, I can't get photos. But so they were sending me suggestions on how to try to set this steering system up. Luckily, I just had everything on board. And I followed their advice, and it took me about 3 hours to get it really dialed, and I was pointing for Hawaii. And I didn't even mention it to my shore team because I was like, I'm gonna wait like a couple hours to actually make sure this is working. And they started blowing up. They're like, you figured it out, you figured it out. Because they could see that I'd come about on the tracker and I was pointing for Hawaii. So what a drogue is it's a drag device that is normally used to slow a boat down the face of large waves. So if you're in the Southern Ocean, basically if you're someplace you shouldn't be, if you're in the Southern Ocean or in the Bering Sea or even off the coast of Washington at the wrong time of year, the waves get so big that you'll surf down it to such a speed that you can pitch pole. So you'll actually dig into the sea or the back of another wave and flip in for hand, which is not good. So that's what they're normally used for. It slows your ascent down the waves. I found this one in the dumpster at Newmark's, the super sketchy marina I used to have my boat at in LA Harbor. And I have this terrifying memory of the day I was leaving the slip for good. I had a giant pile of stuff I had to get rid of, and I had a little bitty pile of stuff that I was going to try to keep. And I held that thing over each pile. And this thing is big, it's rigid, it's a pain to stow. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I have to buy one of these when I get to Chile, I'm gonna be so pissed because I have a free one. So I was like, I'm just gonna figure out where to stow it and then get rid of it later if I don't use it. And so, thankfully, I kept it on board. The easiest way for me to describe how it worked for me is, it's like when you're paddling a canoe and you hold your paddle flat and it brings your bow around this way, you put the paddle here, it comes around this way. So that's exactly how I had it set up. I had the spinnaker pole lashed completely aft, and then I had control lines going to midships, and I would move the drogue from one side of the boat to the other to adjust for like the pressure on the sails, basically. And that's how I steered the boat for 1,000 miles, 14 days. This next photo puts into perspective ocean sailing. You're actually closer to people on the space station than you are to people on land when you're in the middle of the ocean. So, that's why. I had some amazing experiences after that. It was like, I was pretty scared to carry much sail at first, and then slowly built my confidence and carried more sail. But it's like you're driving with the parking brake on. So I was doing if I was doing 3.5 knots, I was stoked. Now I'm a much better sailor. I believe that I could have carried more sail now, but I was so scared because I was in a survival situation. I was like, I'm not gonna do silly shit. I'm just gonna play it safe and just crawl my way away, and it worked out. One of the amazing experiences I had on the sail to Hawaii was a very large school of tuna took refuge under the boat for 3 days. And it was a massive marlin. It was like all-you-can-eat buffet every day. And at night, I would go out and watch them, and you would see the tracers of the bioluminescence. So as the marlin would strike, it was just like a glow underwater. I've seen dolphins do it a lot, but the marlin, you would see the tuna run, so there were like these tracers of glowing underneath the boat. It was fantastic. Really incredible experience. For me, not for them. As I approached the Hawaiian Islands, I saw the island of Molokai, and I screamed until my throat hurt. I was very, very stoked. And for sure won't forget that. And it took a long time. I got very close before I saw that damn island. I made my way down the channels between the Molokai Channel and dropped the anchor at Oahu, at famous Waikiki Beach in Honolulu. And it was easily like the worst anchor experience of my life. It was like a Sunday, so there's 1,000 boats out. And like, I don't know if has anybody here been to Honolulu or been surfing out there? So like right where Diamond Head is in Honolulu, that wind just accelerates. It was blowing 20 knots and a squall came in. I just laughed. Neptune was like fucking with me so hard. I'm coming in, 20 knots, no steering. There's boats, there's like power boats zipping up, like taking my spot. It took me an hour to drop the anchor. I just like kept coming around, finally got the hook down, and then later that afternoon, a buddy came and towed me into safe harbor. And I assumed this position in paradise. 32 days at sea, 1,000 miles without steering, and after I walked to get food, and I had really bad sea legs, so I was just everything was moving. That was the only time it's happened. Really bad sea legs. I spent 8 months in Hawaii, licking my wounds, repairing the boat, making a bunch of major upgrades, and exploring the Hawaiian Islands. While I was there, I visited almost every anchorage on Oahu. I visited Molokai, Lanai, Maui, and the Big Island of Hawaii. And then June of 2022, I set sail and pointed the bow for the Southern Cross, bound for French Polynesia. And I had the worst 9 days of sailing of my entire life. It was that for 9 days. It was so brutal. Because I had to get so much easting so that I could come about, because I wanted to go to Tumotu. So, and everyone's like, why didn't you go to the Marquesas? I'm like, no, not possible. Not on my boat. So, yeah, it was super brutal. And, but then finally I got to the doldrums, and I took the chance to swim in 16,000 feet of water, untethered from my boat, swim out, looked at Tritea, the Great Pacific Ocean, and got like 1,000 comments saying that I was a lunatic for doing that. It's fantastic, and if you ever get the opportunity to do it full out. Shortly after that, finally crept my way back into the trade winds, and soon we are crossing the equator, which is a very important moment for any sailor. I gained the title of shellback, and this is me pouring a bucket of water from the equator over me to do part of my ceremony for Neptune. After that point, I was able to ease the sheets and have really gorgeous sailing for the next stretch down to Rangiroa. Before I had left, and while I was on the passage, I'd been studying Polynesian wayfinding navigation. I'd read David Lewis's book, We the Navigators, 3 times, and I was referencing Pathway the Birds from Andrew Crow daily. The Polynesians, they're a Stone Age people. They didn't even know metal existed, and they settled the entire Pacific Ocean. Every small piece of coral, every atoll. They just, well, no problem, we'll get in our double-hulled canoe and just go into the middle of the ocean. And they did so memorizing the stars, what stars lived above what islands. They watched the birds, they followed the birds, like, where are they going? Let's follow those dudes. And then they got to where they could read the clouds, and all they used was nature. And this was when Europeans were terrified of even letting the coast out of their sight, and they had compasses and octants. Polynesians, unbelievable. So wayfinding is a lifelong pursuit of memorization that is unbelievable. So I would never, ever claim to use it in my navigation, but I really enjoyed using elements that they passed down to us and recognizing those as I sailed. I would smile when the booby birds and the Eva birds arrived, knowing that I was within 150 nautical miles of land in some direction. And for me, I have GPS. I was able to pull it up and confirm I was 150 nautical miles. And it's like incredible. As I approached Rangiroa, which is this photo, I was able to see the cloud that held residence over the atoll. Now, atolls in the Tumotus, you can't see anything until you're within 4 miles because the land is so low lying. You see like a smudge of green of the palm trees, maybe 6 miles out. So, but you can see clouds that are trapped over the lagoons and over the atolls. And all the other clouds are in the trade winds, so they're just marching along. So it was fun to spot that, and like really seasoned wayfinders can tell you the makeup of the island or atoll from the color on the bottom side of the cloud. So if it's a light pink shade, that means it's a coral atoll. If it's a turquoise blue, it means it's a large lagoon. If it's green, then it's a forested island. I wasn't there. It was really amazing for me to arrive to the Tuamotus, Rangiroa, French Polynesia. This was my first solo landfall, foreign landfall, and my first landfall, sort of foreign landfall on Traitea. So for me, it was a fantastic moment. I'm like, wow. It also, another important thing is, it was 2,323 miles, so almost the exact same distance between Los Angeles and Hawaii. So those are actually the largest distances I will have to cover on the rest of the circumnavigation, hopefully. One of the highlights of Rangiroa was visiting Motu Fama, which is my first uninhabited motu. I mean, look at the color of the water. So there's like no one there. It's across, I sailed across the uncharted lagoon. I was sailing, and it's tricky when you're solo. I was sailing, and there are very few turtles, sea turtles in French Polynesia. And I see a honu, they say in Hawaii, honu. I see a honu, I was like, oh, honu. And I was like, oh shit, he's feeding. He was like eating on coral. I ran back and missed the coral bombing by like 4 feet. Because it was like, but if I hadn't seen that turtle, I would have hit that bomb, full on. So that's always a risk in the two motus. But the Motu Famo, incredible. I explored the Hoa, which is the water that goes between the motus. I explored the outer reef, and then I held court with some extremely patient hermit crabs that went for a ride in my pocket for half an hour because I thought they were shells. Literally, you can't pick up any shells anywhere in French Polynesia. They're all residences. Some other highlights of Tuamotus was Tikihau, which is the next atoll down. I had an amazing experience swimming with the mantas alone. And we're so used to going to gorgeous places and just being swamped by people. And here I just swam up on the cleaning station, and there's like massive, gorgeous mantas just chilling with me. I'm like, this is amazing. And those, like that beast is like 8 feet wide. They're so big. Colby Thorpe doesn't like them. We swam with him in Hawaii, and he was not a fan. He was too scared of them. I also visited an abandoned pearl farm, which was pretty fantastic to see the ruins, and there was like hundreds of terns that were nesting near to it. After Tikihau, I left the Dangerous Isles and sailed for the Society Islands. I had a pretty rough passage. It was only 150 nautical miles, but pretty rough passage to Tahiti. But as I closed in on Tahiti, it was midnight. I was approaching the channel into Papeete Harbor, and the rich scent of vanilla blew down from the mountains out to sea and to it. And being an American from the city, I was like, that's got to be a bakery. There's some massive bakery. But it turns out it was not a bakery. It was so rich, the smell was unbelievable. While I was in Tahiti, I visited the Tahiti Outer Known Pro surf competition and saw the world's best surfing the massive wave that is Tiapu'o'o. If you ever go to Tahiti, you can take a taxi boat out and sit on the edge of this monster, and it is fantastic. You cannot understand the power of this wave until you're sitting right there listening to it. Really remarkable experience. Some other wonderful things I did in the Society Islands. I visited Morea and its otherworldly landscapes. I visited the sacred blue-eyed eels of Huahine. They're these very long, very gentle freshwater eels. They have bright blue eyes that kind of glow, and they're protected. They're considered sacred. I went to Tapu Tapu Atea Mare, which is the largest religious site in all of Polynesia on Raiatea, and it was once the center of the Polynesian universe. and the place where they would take stones from Tapu Tapu Atea to start mates everywhere else in Polynesia, including in Hawaii. And I spent the last 2 weeks in Bora Bora, and it's just like classic postcard, absurd. It's absurd. Everywhere you look, like, how is this real? I mean, this is right off my boat. I'm just staring at it, drinking coffee in the morning. I'm like, this is absurd. And then it was time to push on. Cyclone season kind of determines everyone's pace when you're sailing through the South Pacific. So I made sail for American Samoa, and I had pretty good downwind sailing, pretty large seas, and 25 knots running, and like, I don't know, 12 to 15 foot seas kind of constantly, which is good for speed if you're running with them. If you're going against them, you're real sad, but they were in my favor. One of the exciting things that happened was my boom came off in the middle of the night on that passage, right after a really big squall. And so I got to wrestle that scenario, and a very large wave found its way into my bilge, and my floorboards were floating, which is also a thing I hope to never experience again. After a short stay in Pago Pago, American Samoa, I made my way on to Fiji. Fiji is incredible. Fiji is wild and raw, multicultural, and just sketchy enough that you feel alive. Fiji is really remarkable. I rested up in Copper Shed Marina in Sabu Sabu, and then made my way to Vodomo Village, where I went to see a waterfall that they have. And I want to play you this clip because it's one of my favorite memories of my entire life. And check it out. My escort party. So we went into the village and offered sebu sebu to the chief. Got permission to go to the waterfall. Peter and his gang are gonna escort me to the waterfall. And super stoked. Gonna look out for some birds and see the sights. Wild man. I gotta go put my swim trunks on and get in this water. Absolutely fantastic. That joy. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And there's no cell service in that village. Like, those kids are free in a way that we will never know. Really beautiful experience. I moved on after that to the island of Mackinac, which is a former leper colony, and it's now a marine conservation site where the Fijian Marine Fisheries organization is set up in the village. There they are replenishing all of the coral in Fiji and the endangered blue lip clams, the giant clams. So they grow them all right here at Makanai. And one of the interesting things I found out is there's obviously a lot of problems with coral bleaching we're having worldwide with the rising water temperatures. There's also really big problems with them with cyclones. So they'll just get hammered by cyclones and destroyed. But one of the cool things when the bleaching events happen is the marine biologist from Makanai goes snorkeling over the sites, and if they find one piece of coral that's still alive, they take it here, and they grow it because they know it's more resilient to the warming temperatures. So then they're populating these reefs with these corals and to try to like get ahead of it. So that was really neat, and to get to see how they're going about it. I mean, that clam was like that big. It was so huge. And they were endangered, so. The village's two sole inhabitants while I was there was Pao and his wife Mary. Pao is a marine biologist with the fisheries department, and he walked me around the facilities and explained everything to me. He showed me they had huge slates full of small clams that were like smaller than a penny. And I sat with them a while in this open shed while they made a new broom out of palm fronds. And they told me the broom will last about 6 months. And he said it takes like 1.5 palm leaves, and they just make a new broom, which was, it's so beautiful. And then I went and wandered about in the leper cemetery, and coming back down the trail, Pao had cut me some fresh papayas to take back to have for breakfast. Really, really beautiful experience. I continued on, heading up to the western group, and I was sailing between the two largest islands, and I want to play you this clip of me reading from a book about that location. I want to read you a passage from this book, Men Against the Sea. It's the account of Captain Bligh and his men in their 23-foot open launch that they were marooned on after the mutiny on the Bounty. Captain Bligh and his men were the first Westerners to ever see the Fijian Islands and to sail through. What we're in now is actually called Bligh Water. They sailed from Tonga, cut straight through the Fijian waters between the two main islands, and then out the other side, and were chased by war canoes at the end of the Isawa group where we're actually going. Now at that time, all the Fijians were cannibals, and they were a very warlike people. So, and Captain Bligh knew this from the Tongans had told Captain Cook and Captain Bligh this when they were there. So, he knew that they were cannibals. So they were definitely keeping their distance. But I want to read you a passage because it's like, for me, it's like one of the coolest things ever to sort of like travel back in time. And sailing presents that opportunity a lot. And right now we're in the exact passage where Captain Bligh and his men sailed through in one of the most remarkable sea voyages of all time. So, I gotta read you this passage because it's crazy cool. I'll read 2 different sections of it, so otherwise it's too long. By mid-afternoon, we were well between 2 great islands. The wind now moderated to a gentle breeze from the east. The sea became calm as if it was within the reefs of Otaheite. Nelson could not take his eyes off the island to the south. I would give 5 years of my life, he said regretfully, for an armed ship and the leisure to explore this archipelago. And I, remarked the captain, yon island would make 10 Otaheites. And the land to the north seems larger still. 5 years. I would give 10 for a ship. No such group has been discovered in this sea. Before sunset, we were amazed on looking over the side to perceive what we were sailing over a coral bank on which there was less than a fathom of water. Had there been the least swell to break on the shoal, we would have been aware of it long before and sailed clear. Since there was nothing to fear save grounding, we continued on our course, keeping a sharp lookout ahead. The launch moved slowly through the water as clear as air. I could see every detail of the bottom. It was as flat as a table, strewn with dead coral and barren of life, seeming to extend for about a mile on either side of us. Twilight was given away to dark when we came to the end of the shoal, which dropped off abruptly into deep water, as do nearly all coral banks of the South Seas. And it says, a rain squall that came after dark wet us to the skin and was over before we could catch more than a gallon of water. And that's exactly what's about to happen to us. So yeah, that's just, for me, it's really exciting for me to know the history of a place and to know such an event happened in this exact place that I'm sailing. Very, very, very cool. So that takes us back to the time travel aspect that I talked about. What originally turned me on to sailing, what originally kind of like captivated me, is that aspect of time travel. And I do my best to research the history of a place, its peoples, and everything I can before I go, because it really enriches the experience of getting to visit these places. I continued on through into this madness, which is the Yasawa group. So that's all coral. So you have to sneak in. And I arrived at Yasawa Island and dropped the hook. And it's unbelievably beautiful there. And I had the great pleasure of having its famous limestone caves all to myself, swimming in this cathedral of natural beauty. And it's just like me and a freshwater eel that you'll see here. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're so used to places being like this, there being like 30 people, or there's a queue, or there's a lottery system so you can even see it. And I just walked up and hopped in. Here's my boy, freshwater eel. Like little side quest right now. Freshwater eels in New Zealand, actually everywhere, but specifically the ones in New Zealand are interesting to me. They're giant, pretty big freshwater eels, and when it's time to breed, they swim out into the open sea from New Zealand to Tonga. They breed and they die, and then their eggs are like mixed with like flotsam and jetsam, like I don't know, seaweed or something. They're very small, they're clear, they're called like glass, they're like glass bead eggs, and they drift with the currents back to New Zealand. And then by the time they get there, they're big enough to fend for themselves. They swim up whichever freshwater creek they can find, and then they live their lives in freshwater before it's time to mate, and they continue the process, which is so insane. But these cats do it too, I just don't know where they go to do dirty things. I kept making my way down the Yasawa group, visited a number of islands, and took in the sights. Many of them are sparsely populated. They'll have like a random village here and there, but for the most part, it was just me and the island. The last island I came to was Drakwa, and this is how clear the water was. And there were parts of it in the past where it was this clear to 70 feet. So you would see these 70-foot tall spires of coral, and you could just see all the way down, and just amazing. And it was also some of the best snorkeling I've ever done in my life. Like the soft coral there is just out of control. The variety, the health of the coral, and as well, and anytime there's healthy coral, then there's like abundant fish life. I would basically just like snorkel until I was shivering, even with a wetsuit on, and then climb out, and then the next day I was like, okay, let's do it again. And I could have spent 10 hours a day snorkeling in these waters. There's just so much to see. And this next photo is this is the only gas station in the Yasawa group. Like, it's just in a shed, you pump it out into a jerry can with some cheesecloth because there's a bunch of debris in it, and that's how you get fuel in the Yasawa group. While I was at Drakwa, I started having pretty severe engine trouble, and actually one morning I woke up and my starter had failed. I had to take it apart, put it back together to even get it going. I finally got it going and made my way to Port Dinero, because that's where all the facilities are, access to mechanics and stuff like that. This is another shot of like what you're going through. And no one Well, no one smart sails at night in Fiji because there's so much coral and because a lot of it is uncharted. So I remember in the Asawa, there was one point I was going and I saw breaking waves on either side. And I looked on avionics and there's nothing there. And I was like, so that's kind of what you have to realize. Like, people only travel in the daytime if possible. But I was arriving in Port General at like 10 p.m. because I couldn't turn the engine off for fear that it wouldn't restart. But it turned out just fine. While I was in Port General, I got the engine running enough that I could get outside of Fiji. Now, when it came time to leave, cyclone season had actually already started. So cyclone season technically starts October 1st. But I met this really cool Kiwi who's in his 70s. He spent his whole life sailing everywhere, but a lot in these waters. I met him in Bora Bora. And we were both in Fiji. And I asked him, I was like, what's the deal? When should I leave? Like, I trust local knowledge over everything else. Like, and he's like, everyone leaves in October and then they get hit by these gnarly spring storms. He was like, mid-November. He said he's left as late as December 21st, which is a little wild for me. So, but I left mid-November from Fiji, and Keith actually like one day before me. The passage to New Zealand is a notorious one. You're leaving the reliable trade winds, and you're heading into variable winds, bigger seas, and really sort of unpredictable weather. I would get hit by systems that never showed up on the weather models, where there was one that was 100 miles wide, that was like 35 knots for 24 hours, and it was on any models. On all the weather models, it said it should have been becalmed. So it's kind of like a roll of the dice once you hit. I'll say you turn left, it's like, it gets wild once you start heading to New Zealand. You're getting into the higher latitudes, you're getting into colder water, and the storms have more teeth down there for sure. But it actually ended up being my most challenging passage I've ever done because of the calms. So I had 3 days of being becalmed entirely, not all in sequence, but 3 days of being becalmed, 4 days of spinnaker sailing, and the rest was either a couple of steady sailing days, and the rest was like really heavy weather. But I did a ton of spinnaker sailing. And I have a lot of friends who don't sail with spinnakers, and they motored so much that I have one set of friends that ran out of fuel entering the Bay of Islands, and another set that they had half a gallon of fuel when they got to Opua. I had plenty of fuel, but my engine didn't work, so I did what I could. I just want to show you my movie bird. That was my hitchhiker, and he made me very happy. He spent the night, we had coffee the next morning, told me some things, it was pretty cool. But this is kind of the conditions that you deal with in New Zealand. It gets a little feisty. I did have one situation that probably would be considered a rogue wave. I steer away from using that word, but it was absurdly larger than everything else I was seeing, that broke entirely over Chaitea and destroyed my solar panel and pooped the boat like to overflowing. And I was like sitting down in the cabin doing my noon position, and it got a little dark. I was like, oh, that's weird, and boom! It was like the wave was so big it got dark. And then there was green water on all of the deadlights in the cabin. So that was exciting. As you get closer and closer to New Zealand, the sun gets less and less frequent. It also gets cold. So I had spent 2 years kind of just hanging out in my underwear, and here I am fully kitted out. And just pushing on. I had a lot of anxiety about approaching New Zealand without a working motor and with these storms that were just one after another. As I was approaching the Bay of Islands, there was another big storm coming. So, like, getting in as quickly as I could was important, but since I couldn't motor, I could only use like the wind I had. I sailed in the dark of dawn into the Bay of Islands, and as the sun slowly crept up, got my first visual on Aotearoa, and it is a magical place. I was under a heavily reefed sail. I think when this photo was taken, I had a third reef in the main, probably, 40% of my head sail out, and I was doing 8 knots. It was a little feisty. I sailed in up to a mile from the quarantine dock. I managed to get so close, and I could not short tack the last mile. Because it was a current against me, the winds were already building inside the channel. And I have a full kill boat, so she doesn't act like a little racer boat. I finally, after an hour and a half of trying to short tack, I'd been awake for 36 hours. I was like, okay, I'm gonna put the dinghy on the head and just crawl in. Came about, dropped the hook on New Zealand seabed for the first time, which I was very excited about, and started getting the dinghy in the water so that I could tie it on the head and get myself in. A really nice Kiwi came up and offered me a ride. He's funny, he pulled up and he was like, hey, what are you doing? Because I was anchored in a weird spot just off the channel. I was like holding a bowl of ramen on the deck. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna I'm gonna put my dinghy on the hip and get in. He's like, oh, I ain't gotta be back at the dock for an hour, you want to tow? I was like, hell yeah. So we hooked it up, he towed me in, and I was stoked because I didn't realize how protected the channel was. And by the time we got to where the dock was, it was blowing 25 knots, and it built to 40 knots in the afternoon. And a lot of people asked me with this clip online, they're like, why in the world did he take you to the outside? Because it's like you're getting hammered, but if he had taken me to the inside where it was protected, it would have blown me off the dock and into the boats moored in the marina. So, but one funny thing about this clip, I don't know if it might take too long to get to it, but we were just yelling at each other like over the winds to try to communicate, but I didn't know he was just going to toss my line. So he was like, okay, you should have some steerage because of the current. And, you get on the dock. And I was like, okay, cool. So I go back to the tiller, and he just slips my line and throws it. I have no sail up. I have no engine. It's blowing 25 knots. This French homeboy's right there. And it just and it worked. I mean, there was no way he could have slowed me down, but it was very shocking. I was like, oh. And so I'm terrible at being able to feel proud of any of my accomplishments. Terrible. But this is a moment I was very proud of. To see Tritan, I have on the top. To see her tied to the dock in New Zealand, that is the biggest milestone yet of the whole thing. And fantastic, super stoked. So I got the engine rebuilt. It took 2.5 months because they're on island time. And after that, I explored Bay of Islands with no engine for a while, sailing about. And since that time, I got there the 1st of December. I have visited 34 anchorages in the Bay of Islands and the Hauraki Gulf, and just seen as much of New Zealand as I can. Just fantastic. It's like the Mecca for cruisers. My buddy Keith, I mentioned earlier, he's 70, spent his whole life staying in New Zealand. He said he hasn't seen half the anchorages. And there's so many beautiful places with great holding. The other beautiful thing is there's no coral there. So it's all mud and very forgiving. So I'm going to be in New Zealand for all of 2023. Well, Tritea will be. And then we're going to sail down to the top of the South Island, do Marble Sounds, and then I plan to clear out of Nelson and sail across the Tasman Sea to Hobart, Tasmania, and spend next cyclone season in Tasmania, and then work my way up the east coast of Australia, inside the Great Barrier Reef, and up to Darwin, and then I'll clear out Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and then on and on. So that's the plan for the immediate future, the next sort of leg of the circumnavigation. Now, traveling the world by sail, it gives you a different relationship with the weather as well as with mortality. And it's nothing short of magic. And anyone in here who's a sailor, we all know that moment when you shut off the engine and the silence grows louder and the boat whispers through the water, just moved by the elements. Unbelievable. And I'm just grateful that I can do this and share it with everybody the way I do. I want to close it out with words from one of, I think everyone will agree, one of the most important philosophers of our age. So many times it happens too fast. You trade your passions for glory. Don't lose your grip on the dreams of the past. You must fight. Thanks everyone for coming out. Appreciate it. And, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we can just chill, I think, for a bit. I don't think we're getting kicked out for an hour. So anybody wants to just hang out, we are, I think. Sarah, was there like 2 books left? Yeah, there's 2 books left, but there's free postcards. And yeah, so what's up? Thanks for coming out.